Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something really cool. We are completely deconstructing the actual mechanics behind achieving long-term goals. We're going to skip all the usual hype, those fleeting New Year's resolutions, and we're looking straight at what the data calls the architecture of success. So we're really focusing in on why building robust systems is going to fundamentally change your trajectory. And spoiler alert, relying on your feelings? Yeah, that simply cannot do the trick. All right, let's just dive right into this.
So why exactly do so many goals fail by week 3? I mean, you absolutely know the feeling, right? You wake up at 5 a.m. on January 1st, you are completely energized, just totally ready to transform your life. But man, 3 weeks later, that alarm feels like your worst enemy, and those brand new running shoes are literally just collecting dust in the corner. So what actually goes wrong here? Well, it's because we rely on the dopamine hit of novelty. See, we get this massive chemical reward when we start something new, but neuroscience confirms that once our brain adapts to it, that novelty just evaporates. It's gone. If your entire action plan depends on feeling that January 1st energy every single day, you're honestly just setting a massive trap for yourself.
And that brings us to this incredibly stark contrast between motivation and discipline. Look, motivation is just an emotion. It is super fleeting. It fluctuates based on how much sleep you got, your stress levels, your mood, which makes it incredibly fragile and, honestly, totally unreliable. But discipline, on the other hand, is a learned skill. It's a completely predictable system. See, motivation basically asks, hey, do I feel like doing this today? While discipline steps in and asks, is it time to do this? Telling yourself that you're going to start when you finally feel ready or, just waiting around for inspiration to strike, that is really just a highly sophisticated form of procrastination.
Okay, so to really unpack all of this, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First up, we've got the myth of motivation. Then we'll look at systems over willpower, followed by the power of iterative failure, mastering rhythm and pacing, and finally, we'll wrap up with the compounding effect.
All right, Section 1, the myth of motivation.
And moving right along to Section 2, systems over willpower.
So, to really tackle these first two concepts, we have to just put it out there. Motivation isn't inherently bad. Actually, it's fantastic for getting you off the couch on day one. But it is a completely unreliable emotion that absolutely will not show up for you at 6 a.m. when it's freezing and raining outside. We have to build systems that completely bypass willpower. Take a look at highly successful AI video creators on YouTube, for example. They are pulling in millions of views. How? By building perfectly repeatable workflows. They aren't sitting around waiting for artistic inspiration. They lock in a system to generate their scripts and visuals all in one streamlined timeline. And because that workflow is repeatable, they can scale their content up without completely burning out. The decision has already been made. They literally just have to execute. This whole idea is captured so perfectly by Jim Rohn. He said, "Motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going." If motivation is basically just hoping the wind blows in the right direction, and willpower is frantically rowing harder when it doesn't, well, discipline is the motor we build to just completely take the place of those fleeting emotions.
Okay, so how do we actually build that motor? Well, behavioral research gives us a few surprisingly simple, highly actionable steps. First, start absurdly small. Seriously, don't commit to some brutal 2-hour workout right out of the gate. Just commit to putting on your gym clothes. That's it. Second, design your environment. If you want to read more, put a book right on your pillow and toss your phone in another room. Third, you want to use implementation intentions. Basically, just be specific. Say something like, I will do 20 push-ups at 7 a.m. in my living room, rather than just some vague, I'll exercise today. And finally, anchor your new habits to your existing routines, like writing for just 10 minutes right after you pour your morning coffee. The whole goal here is to make the right action the default action.
That takes us to Section 3, the power of iterative failure.
Here's the thing. When you're executing a disciplined system day after day, you are inevitably going to encounter failure. It is completely unavoidable. But a disciplined system requires us to totally reframe failure. It's not an endpoint. It's just a required data point. And that brings us to iteration. Iteration is the process of continually pivoting and making changes to a product or an idea based on failure to achieve eventual success. When we look at the psychological research, Carol Dweck frames this beautifully with her concept of the growth mindset. It's this understanding that your abilities can actually be developed, and that setbacks, they're just informational learning opportunities, not some fixed limitation on who you are. The most resilient entrepreneurs use this exact mindset to interpret their failures constructively.
And we see this concept perfectly mapped out in Eric Ries's lean startup methodology: build, measure, learn. It's basically a set of strategies for mitigating your risk through what they call the fail-fast model in tech.
The big idea here is that if a product or an idea is going to fail, you want it to fail quickly and cheaply rather than slowly and super expensively. By building and testing an early minimum viable product and then measuring the actual data, you learn exactly what needs to be changed. You take that data and you iterate.
When you compare massively successful entrepreneurs, it becomes so clear that these iterative principles apply universally, no matter the scale. Think about high-profile billionaires like Steve Jobs. He was famously fired from his own company, Apple, before using that massive failure to go build Next and Pixar. Or Walt Disney. He literally lost the rights to his very first major character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, right before he went on to create Mickey Mouse. But this isn't just for billionaires. Look at the other end of the spectrum, like a low-profile local real estate entrepreneur such as Jim Brown. He faced massive, crippling excess inventory issues in an early business selling projectors. But he used that failure to iterate his skills into what became a highly successful real estate firm. Across the board, resilience, iteration, grit, and a growth mindset are always present. For all of these guys, failure wasn't the end. It was the exact catalyst they needed.
Moving on to Section 4, Mastering Rhythm and Pacing.
So, a disciplined, highly iterative system absolutely requires a sustainable rhythm, because otherwise you are going to inevitably face burnout. You just can't sprint endlessly, right? To really grasp this, we found this fascinating analogy pulled straight from film editing theories. Film editors have to carefully balance internal rhythm, which is basically the emotional and psychological pace of a story, with external pacing, which is the literal physical speed of the cuts on screen. Applying this to our own goals, if we only focus on the physical execution, just that daily relentless grind, we completely lose our emotional investment. Intertwining our internal emotional beats, our core why, with a truly sustainable external physical pace, that is exactly what keeps us totally engrossed and invested in our long-term goals without crashing and burning out.
Let's look at another fantastic analogy for this kind of methodical pacing, this time from the world of cinematography. When a cinematographer sets up really natural, gorgeous cinematic lighting, they don't just, throw all the lights on at once and just hope for the best. No way. They set up early, giving themselves plenty of time. They turn the lights on one by one to see exactly how each single light impacts the scene. And they might realize, hey, this setup feels a bit fake, so they methodically flip the angle to match the natural light coming in from a window. Finally, they'll step back and adjust the physical distance of the subject to tweak the contrast. This patient, step-by-step process is just a perfect analogy for how you should thoughtfully pace out and iterate any challenging project in your own life. Seriously, don't rush it. Evaluate each element one by one. This is exactly how you prevent that feeling of being overwhelmed that ultimately leads to quitting.
And finally, Section 5, the compounding effect.
All right, we are zooming out to the macro scale now. We're going to see how all these daily, methodically paced, and iterative actions start to yield truly exponential growth over time. So I have a really fascinating question for you. How long does it actually take for your effort to double? Think about it. If you're putting in consistent effort, when do you finally see that massive return?
Well, the answer is actually mathematically tied to the number 72. In finance, there's this brilliant mental shortcut known as the rule of 72. Basically, if you take the number 72 and you divide it by your annual rate of return, you get the approximate number of years it'll take for your investment to double in value. But here's the truly incredible takeaway from the source material today. This rule doesn't just apply to money. It applies perfectly to human behavior. It applies to compounding your skills, your habits, and your resilience over time. Research from Fiduciant Advisors elegantly demonstrates the math backing this up when it comes to compounding time. At its core, compounding happens when the returns on an initial investment start generating their own additional returns over time. It creates this massive snowball effect. And the exact same thing goes for your discipline. Every single workout you manage to complete when you really didn't feel like it, every single time you iterate and pivot after a failure, that is reinvested effort. It is compounding, and it is accelerating your growth exponentially over the long term.
All of this leaves us with one final, absolutely critical thought to conclude our explainer today. Will you wait around to feel ready, or will you build the system today? Because here is the harsh truth. You are never simply going to feel ready. That magical motivation you're waiting for, it's not coming. And honestly, even if it does, it's certainly not going to stick around. But the best part is, you don't even need it. Choose discipline. Embrace failure as a necessary data point. Find your own sustainable rhythm and just let time compound your efforts. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I highly, highly encourage you to go start building that system right now.